Good evening, everyone. If you can hear me, if you could just put it on the chat window. Just type on the chat window that you can hear me. Just to make sure all of you can. Okay, great. Thanks, Imanshu. Thanks, Akshay. All right. So today's episode 4 of our Careers After MBA series. So we've already covered product management. We focused career in healthcare. We've also focused career in consulting. And today we have another very interesting topic where we are going to focus on supply chain. And we have a very interesting speaker too and guest with us today. I will be introducing him in a while. So before that, thank you, everyone. I just want to thank all of you who have come and are attending this webinar. If you could just type in where you're joining in from, what stage are you applying this year? That will also help us get an idea of the stage that you are in. If you could just type in on the chat window. Okay, Akhil is applying for R2, Akshay is applying for R2. From Mumbai, Akhil, where are you from? If you could just type in where you're joining us from, Trivandrum, awesome. Others? All right, somebody's already just preparing for GMAT. Okay. All right. So interesting. So let me get started without any more delay. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Shrikala. I'm the co-founder and the CEO at Crackverbal. I am also one of the chief mentors who help students apply to top schools abroad. I'm also part of the fellow of ISB Goldman Sachs Women Entrepreneur Program. And I also am a mentor with the Cherry Blair Foundation, where I help and mentor students, mentor women entrepreneurs across the world. I have Mukund with me, who's our speaker for the day and our guest, who's going to talk about his journey through an MBA. So Mukund, if you could just introduce yourself, a brief one, because I have a lot more questions to ask you. So maybe just a brief intro over here would be good.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and great to be here. So just a quick about me. So I'm from India, from Cochin originally. Did my undergrad in engineering from NIT Trichy. Worked with Caterpillar in India at a few different locations well, that's why I started my logistics journey, if you will. Did an MBA from the Stephen M. Ross School of Business, graduating 2017, joined Amazon and have been with them since in a few different roles across North America and now currently based out of London. And like I said, excited to be here and looking forward to speaking with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mukund. So before we get started, a few do's and don'ts. So please type in your questions on the Q&A window. I will make sure that we answer all your questions, especially which are in the scope of this webinar. I'll definitely do that. The last 15 minutes, we'll focus on getting the questions. A few things about Crackverbal before we get started. So we've been in helping students with GMAT as well as MBA consulting for years now. I might missed a lot of logos here, but yes, we've helped students get into top schools for over a decade now from most of the top schools that are listed over here. What we are going to do today is we are going to focus on Mukund's journey to getting into Ross. This is more like an agenda of what we are going to discuss, his experience at Ross, and also specifically focusing on the supply chain career, because Mukund, this is something that a lot of our students who are looking at operations as a career option post MBA look at, and that's what we want to understand a little bit more about, because a lot of us don't have the visibility of what it takes to have that clarity while you apply for an MBA program, and also what is life after that, right? So our focus is completely to get those information from you. So we will be discussing, and I will be asking you questions and getting your insights on the same. All right. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your background. So you gave us a brief. You mentioned you've done your engineering mechanical from Cochin. So tell me, how did you get into your first job and what was your first role all about?
Sure, absolutely. So I did engineering at Trichy, and I think it was around the time of, I'm sure most of you have been through campus placements. We had Caterpillar, who hadn't done much recruiting up until that time. So I graduated in 2011 from Trichy, and they were on campus for a few different roles, mostly focused around pure engineering, but they also had a few different roles in logistics and supply chain. And I didn't know much about logistics at that point. But it was something I was curious about, something that I had a conversation with the recruiting team when they were on campus, something that I wanted to learn that was a little bit different from what I'd been doing in core engineering at that point. I didn't fully know what I was getting myself into. Went in with the intention of learning more about it, and I'm very glad I did. So my first role was in Caterpillar as a sort of operations manager. The key element there, I think, with Caterpillar being, for those of you who don't know, Caterpillar is a heavy mining equipment manufacturing American company that's based out of a fairly large global presence, had been in India for, I think, about 12, 13 years at that point, but still kind of in transition. They bought over a factory from Hindustan Motors, I think, at that point. So what that essentially was is a kind of blend of knowing about automotive, about engineering, coming with that background, so which is the end product. But a lot of the background on how do you get the pieces you need in order to build this very technical, very complex machine. And that's not something like while I was in engineering, I gave much thought about. You study about strength of materials, you study about automotive, you know how an engine works, you know where what pieces go where. But in terms of the global sort of element of what the first mile, the middle mile, where do you store it? How do you plan for a lot of these costs around the procurement of these parts, the lead times that are involved. So you talk about manufacturing, a lot of focus has historically gone into what happens, what we call under the roof in terms of the actual manufacturing. How do you get your lead times from the start of manufacturing to the end of manufacturing within the time frame, budget, cost that you want it to be? But there's a lot of gaps in what happens before that, and that's where the biggest sort of area of opportunity was. So my first role, kind of going back into it, was essentially in a part of that early logistics operation, setting up some of the warehousing, so part engineering, part logistics in terms of the material flow process for Caterpillar at the kind of flagship plant we had at the time in Tiruvallur, and also near Bangalore, near Hosur, which is where they had a separate plant at. So I worked at a few different plants over there, helping them set up the warehousing, understanding what the material flow process there were, and also coordinating, I think, and learning quite a bit from some of the global partners that we had in terms of a lot of parts were imported parts because it is an American company. It had manufacturing in Thailand and UK at that point. So learning quite a bit about what elements, how do we kind of plan it in a way that works well for our manufacturing plants that we had in India. Right. So that was my first taste of logistics, if you will.
Right. So how long did you work with Caterpillar?
I worked with Caterpillar for 4 years. I was in Tiruvallur for a year. At the first level of operation management, so I had a small team at the time. I was there for a year in a slightly different role, more project management focused for one of the manufacturing lines, so supplying all the materials, so ensuring I have all the materials for the supply line in Hosur. And then I moved back to Tiruvallur and essentially worked on a brand new manufacturing plant setup, which is again a very exciting and exciting sort of endeavor from the supply chain logistics perspective. So making sure we have the lead times, inventory turnover, space for storage of inventory, process of refill from inventory to machine line. So a lot of the inside logistics and background supply chain for a new site. So I was there for about 2 years before I embarked on my MBA.
Right. So 4 years of experience, doing very well, already working with in an international company, learning so much on the job. What made you feel that MBA was important, or what made you feel that you're ready for an MBA at that point?
That's an excellent question. I think part of that experience, while working with some of our international stakeholders and working on projects and elements within this, international company that I hadn't really experienced, so stretching myself along the lines of skills that I hadn't really, had a chance to explore much during my undergrad, right? So I felt I had a good grasp on the core engineering, automotive elements, but in terms of leadership, in terms of people management, people development, and also an understanding of what all goes into the supply chain. Like this is kind of the tip of the iceberg that I was exploring. This is one manufacturing plant. Although I was learning quite a bit, it was more from the focus of the job than from hey, what exactly exists in this space? And it feels like, a little bit of uncharted territory, not just for me, but as an industry as a whole, if you will. So that kind of was what prompted that initial discussion. I was, undecided for a period of time in terms of whether I wanted to do more of a master's on the engineering elements or whether an MBA is the right fit for me. But I realized I was very excited about, the ability to learn about more of these topics that, if you talk about manufacturing a plant, and if you're talking about very senior leadership, a lot of the skill sets that you have to develop and grow on are not, just core subject specific. That's a good foundation to build on, but you need to learn more about, finance, about marketing, about, people management, leadership. And I felt an MBA was a great sort of stepping point in order to get some of those skills and accelerate that career and learning path in terms of what I want to do next.
Right. So, always when you think of an MBA, the first thing is about getting GMAT out of the way, right? So, how was that process for you? And, how did you actually, if you have to talk about a couple of things that aspirants should focus on when they are looking at taking their GMAT along with a full-time job, right? How did you manage that? And, how is it for you?
Absolutely. It was not easy. It is not easy, I suppose. It is, when you're working a full-time job and that, it takes up quite a bit of your time. I'm sure everyone's quite busy. It's all very intense. And it requires, and especially if you had a few years of work experience, going back into that study mindset, preparing for an exam requires a little bit of a reshifting, thinking back to your college days, engineering days, or whatever you're studying, while still focusing on your day-to-day, task responsibilities. The last year and a half especially has not been easy with COVID and so on and so forth. I think the way I approached it, and I don't think it was the greatest way. I wish I'd known about Crackverbal then. But I essentially went at it from I don't know much about MBA. I had not networked as much as I should have. I knew I had to write this exam, so I went ahead and kind of took a blind attempt at it. Didn't do too shabbily the first attempt, but not what I thought I could do. So I kind of took the learnings from there. I self-subscribed to a few courses and sort of online prep. I had a few friends who had taken it previously, so I kind of reached out to them to get some advice, tried to focus in on some of the elements I didn't do quite as well at the first time around. And then I went back again, tried to set up a timeline in terms of what's realistic. So I think the first time I took it was at about 3.5 years of work experience at that time. I still hadn't fully committed to that MBA. It was more something that I was exploring. So I gave myself about 6 months. Said, okay, if I take another attempt, it's something that I want to really make sure I commit to. So I did a lot of mock tests, did a lot of self-practice in the areas I thought I had some opportunities at. And I gave it the second time around. I was pleasantly surprised. I think I got a 760 or something, which I was pretty happy with. So I think that I kind of worked out. Just kind of in the elements of how in that 6 months what I changed. I think you need to be very structured in as much as possible, right? Whether that's about one of the very simple things I did. I didn't have a good work desk set up at the time at home where I could study from. That was big enough to actually sit and study apart from where I was working. So it's kind of set myself a space, and I said, okay, every day, I'd go to the gym and then I'd spend 2 hours on this particular topic, and then I'd spend the next week on so and so topic, and I'll have these checkpoints. Excuse me. every 2 weeks, or I'll do one mock test every month or 2 weeks, or so on and so forth. Having that structure and having pushing yourself to follow that regimen really helped out.
Right, right. So were you always keen on applying to USB schools, or did you look at other options? Were you looking at other geographies too?
I think at the time, and this is like 2014, 2015, I was primarily focused on applying to the US, primarily because I had a lot of my friends who had gone there either for masters or were working there, and it seemed like a good sort of soft landing, if you will, in terms of adapting to culture, adapting to an area, and having a support base there already. Mm-hmm. However, I at the time, I think ISB had been around for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. I think, I'm not quite sure, but obviously IIMs are the premier institutes in India, and as well as recognized around the world. I think I personally wanted to look at going abroad more from the elements I learned in terms of the cultural differences from working, like I said, at Caterpillar. I felt that would add value for me at that point. I did have a few friends who had gone to ISB, they had really great feedback. I had looked at it as a sort of, should I, if I, it is something that I considered, especially from a financial perspective. I think it made a lot of sense, and I felt like in terms of the quality of education, is a good sort of value in that. However, as I said, I think the US was my primary kind of focus area.
Right. So how when you're looking at the research part, what kind of research did you do? Did you actually talk to alums, or how much time do you think is typically required in terms of the research aspect of it?
The honest truth, I didn't think I did enough of it. I would say as much as you can. I would say, depending on whichever round it is, it doesn't have which year. This is a long endeavor, right? It's not like an overnight. You talk about GMAT, you want to get a GMAT score that you're comfortable with. You have the set of schools that you want to apply to, and when you say set of schools, that you want to look at what all, apart from this geography, I think, which you just touched about. A lot of these schools, it's about fit, right? About what you want to do after that. It's about what do the schools focus on. And that requires a fair bit of, exactly like you said, researching the schools, talking to people who have studied there, are studying there. The internet, it's a great resource. There's quite a bit. A lot of these universities have programs for outreach, to learn more about them. It's a bit different now in the post-pandemic world, but back in 2014, 2015, they did have events. Like, I think there are lunch and learn sort of events that happened. I remember in Bangalore and Chennai and Delhi, where you could go and they present and you can learn more, ask questions. Trying to allocate time in attending those definitely is very, very beneficial. Mm-hmm. And the more you can do of it, the more prepared you'll be, the more you know. And the more, I think it's a two-way street, right? Like, and you learn more about the colleges, and you know exactly what you want to get into, right? It's not just online, just numbers on a screen or rankings, or you want to get into a particular job. The more information you have, the better decision you can make.
Right. So was your choice for Ross more around you being in the operations domain, because Michigan is known for having a lot more automobile or manufacturing industries? Was that on your mind when you actually chose Ross?
Absolutely. It wasn't something I had put a lot of thought into at I guess at the very initial stages. But as I started on this journey of discovering more about colleges, what do I want to do post my MBA? What's a good fit in terms of both in terms of what the colleges are offer, both in terms of how the course is structured, in terms of what they have, but as well as the region, in terms of the opportunities after that. So Ross specifically, for example, has the Tauber Institute of Operations, which is a combined collaborative sort of effort between the Ross School of Business and the engineering school, specifically focused on supply chain and operations. It's something I came to know about while I was researching the college. So yes, the shop was very much so, which is why Ross is among the top schools that I was looking at from that purview of operations. Plus, as you said, Michigan is the base for GM, Ford, so the big automotive, like a long history of that automotive background, which is, tied in well with what I had done before. So it was very much of the background, but also I think the other element is in terms of how I like to approach education, fitted in very well with the view that Ross presented, which is, they have their action-based learning. So a lot of focus on, hands-on learning as opposed to just classroom sessions and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was a big part of it, but that wasn't the only part, I suppose.
Right. So a lot of people, when I'm talking to people, even who have got into top schools, right? Were there people who were not really clear? So, there is one part to you where you're trying to map what you want to do eventually based on the skill sets you have already. However, there's also aspect that MBA is a course that gives you the flexibility to actually change industries, to actually change into different kind of roles, or even pivot into completely doing something completely different. In your view, or, especially for people who are looking at applying right now, our focus is completely around saying that, okay, give strength to your application and connect your application to the skill sets that you already have. But after you get into an MBA, how do you work around it? How do you bring in that clarity that, okay, after 2 years, this is what I want to do? Because there's also so much that a school has to offer in terms of clubs and peer learning and, other things, right? So how did all this work out for you, or what was your strategy when you actually got into a top B school?
Absolutely, that's a really great point, and it's 100% accurate. You do want to play to your strengths at the time of application, and you have a path forward that makes sense to when you're making that application to a particular school. But once you do get in, and you find that, I think from my experience when I got there, both in terms of the cohort that you're with, the different backgrounds of people that were coming into the MBA, just very non-traditional. You have from the army, from the arts backgrounds, and the different paths that you can take based on what you're interested in, what you want to pursue. So for Ross specifically, you have the avenue and the freedom to select that. So you can select your electives. You can network with whichever industry, whichever company, whichever area that you want to learn more about. And if you want to make that switch over, it's not an easy path, but you definitely have that opportunity to do that. And the school is very, very supportive of it, and they are aware that there is. If I had to make a guess, you have, I think it's probably maybe a 50-50 portion of people who are coming in. Yes, I want to go into this, and my prior path kind of very, segues in very well, dovetails in very well with exactly what I want to do. But a very good portion of people who are coming in with, I have a certain set of skill set that I've built up, but I want to acquire these skill sets in this subject matter and move into a very completely different field. I have friends of mine who came from Teach for America, very social nonprofit organization, who are now successful investment bankers. It's you blend in that set of skill set, and the school is very helpful and appreciative of that. But it will require, there are resources, again, kind of the same process in terms of application, sort of going on a little bit there. But you're going to have to network, learn more, figure out what you want to switch into and why you want to do it, and make sure you have good reasons for that. Why you want to follow it. Is that something you see yourself doing?
Right. Tell me a little bit more about Ross, right? How's the cohort, and more from the class, right? I guess you have around 400 odd students in the class. So how many people actually get in from India? And if you could just throw some light on that aspect.
Absolutely. So the Stephen M. Ross School of Business, which is part of the University of Michigan's overall campus, it's based in Ann Arbor, which is a lovely town about an hour east of Detroit. Gets a little bit cold, but lovely, lovely part of town. We have, as you said, about 400 students. I think in my cohort, so that was a graduating batch of 2017, we had about 430. I think we had about 40 people in my year from India, so quite a significant, I think about 10%. And I think we've generally seen around that percentage mark year on year. I think Ross is very focused on, as I mentioned, the action-based learning. It's not very, it's not a very curriculum hard focus, you learn XYZ. It's very open to, what you want to get out of it. But the area that they focus on very much is around taking those opportunities to get your hands in. So one of the key map parts of the Ross, I guess, MBA or the highlights of it is what they call their MAP project, the multi-action disciplinary project. What it essentially is even prior to your internship, you get to spend about 3 months with a group of your peers working on very diverse projects. So it's a 2-month project. Like it's fully fledged. It's in lieu of a term where you just work with a top company somewhere. Could be a company, could be a non-profit, whatever project it is, as a sort of internship, as a sort of soft landing to get your hands in, to get some of that experiential learning, as we call it, even before you do an internship. So it's a very kind of hands-on environment, and the onus is on you to kind of learn what you would like and take it from the classroom, which resonated very, very well with me. So about 400 people, I think about 10% Indians. I think in terms of the how the cohort split, in terms of, I think Amazon's one of the big recruiters of Michigan. A lot of folks go into consulting. I think not quite as much in terms of, I think at the time, at least in terms of technology, and not as much in terms of banking. But again, kind of tying back into the earlier question, you want to kind of figure out where you want to go to, in which country, which part of the country, which industries that you're focusing on. But it is very much a general MBA. Operations is one of the few elements of my particular journey, because I knew I wanted to do operations. The Tauber School, which I don't think very many schools have those specific split ups for a particular type of institute, which Ross does. So the Tauber Institute is that tie-up, or it's a certain set of courses and experiences that help you focus in on operations. I think MIT LGO is somewhat similar. So I continued part of that. I had classmates who came from a similar sort of, I want to go into operations, but decided, no, that's not what I want to do. I wanted to focus more on tech. So, kind of dropped out of the Tauber element, continued on with a more general MBA course load, and then decided to go their own path. So it's very up to you, very hands-on. Absolutely, an amazing 2 years that I had.
All right. So how does a typical day look like, and how is the whole course structured more from a core electives perspective? How does that work?
Sure. My knowledge might be a little bit dated, but I will do my best. But you're absolutely right. There are, I think in your first year, you spend time on a lot of core subjects. So it's like foundational finance, marketing, operations. I think there was one on statistics. It was not, I would say, especially compared to coming from engineering in India, it's not particularly sort of, I guess, study intensive, right? Again, with Ross's view on it being very experiential, like it's not a very grade focused, if you will. And you do want to do well in these subjects, and but it's not the key focus. The key element there is to learn from these core, especially if you come from a background where I know nothing about finance and marketing. It's an opportunity to make sure you have that solid foundation. So on a day, I think the first year is a lot about that. You spend, I think, quite a bit of focus in terms of networking, getting to know your peers, getting to know Ann Arbor, getting to know the college. So for Ross, even before you start off, there is a student-run initiative called, I forget the name of it now, but essentially it's a group of second-year MBA or students who just graduated in the second year that arrange trips to sort of networking, but have fun trips to various parts of the world. And you can select, and you can go along, meet some of the folks who are currently in the cohort, along with some of the people that who are going to be joining in with you. Spend a week or two going out, having fun, and then you get to Ann Arbor, and a lot of that focus, especially in the first few months, is around those networking events, social events, etc. And then the classwork loads, assignments, but you also have a lot of cultural activities, etc. So it tends to be a fairly full day. but in a slightly different manner from
It's
what
20 hours.
Right. Do you have two options of internships, right? During the summer, and how is that spread out?
I think you traditionally have, I think for Ross at least, one internship and one of the, what I mentioned, the MAP project, which tends to happen in lieu of one of the terms. So traditionally there is an internship at the end of your first year, which tends to be about 3 months. And a lot of focus, especially towards the end of your first year, and a lot of the, it's an ongoing activity through the year, is networking with the companies, representatives on site, visiting. Potentially there are tours led by, there's a consulting club of Ross, there's a tech club of Ross, operations club, and they organize visits to, say, factories, locations, etc. And making those contacts that come close to an internship. You have that idea of where you want to go, what you want to do. They're also aware of you. Like I said, networking. And you go into the internship, for if it's a good fit for you and the company, and you might get an offer at the end of internship, and you might decide that's perfect, that's exactly what you want to do. And then your second year tends to be a lot more around, hey, can I take up courses that will then help me, hit the ground running coming into that job full time. Or you can try and condense your courses so that you finished off in 6 months instead of the next one full year, so you can maybe start work a little bit earlier. Some folks do that, but yeah, it can vary depending on what path you follow and what you want to do. Or you could have that internship and say, okay, I had a really great time there, but that's not what I want to do full time. So then you go into your second year, which is then a lot more focused around recruiting. So you probably don't spend quite as much time on in terms of the class workload, but you instead focus quite a lot more on recruiting.
Right. More in terms of from students coming from the Indian background, right? So we come from a completely different education system to a completely American education system. Is, like you said, Ross is very experiential kind of a thing, based on how they go about with their course. This is one question that most of them ask me, that how good is my GMAT score to get an admit to this particular school, right? So in your view, how was the spread? Were there, was the focus more on the profile or the background, or is it a mix of everything?
Yeah, it is, I think, as far as I know, and it is a bit of a black box process, as I'm sure you're aware. And I do, I don't think I gave it the due diligence at the time of my application. I think when you talk about GMAT, obviously the higher, the better for the most part, I think, but it's not an be all end all by any means, right? Like you have, even amongst my, fellow Indian sort of Ross cohort, you had a range of scores. I think it was from 690, 700 to, I think, 770, 780. It's a data point. And again, this, I don't know how applicable it is now. It is a data point, but I think more than that, especially for Ross, is that fit. And it's a word that's used quite often, but I think it's, especially when we talk about coming from where we come from in India, right? You're talking about rankings, you're talking about your score, you start, your JEE rank, your All India rank for your AIR rank, you're talking about your GPA when you graduate. Just to put in context, right? Ross does not share your GPA with prospective employers. You don't have, like, you don't have a graduating score for Ross, which to me blew my mind when I first got there. Like, okay, so as long as I'm passing there, which is what I meant. It's a very different sort of element where the focus is not so much on, hey, you need to get to this particular score. You're paying quite a bit of money. You're there. It's about what you want to learn and what you want to take away from it, right? And obviously, Ross is going to help you guide you into that role that you want to get into. Now, for getting in, as with any business school, they want to make sure that it's a bit of a win-win, right? You're coming in, they see you as a leader who comes in, you add to the culture and to the to the environment of Ross, that you fit in well with what Ross stands for, and that when you're graduating Ross and then you move on to whichever field you move into, that you will be successful there. And then, it's a sort of two-way partnership is built out. And I think what they look for in your applications is evidence to show that that's what's gonna happen. One of the data points being, how well you do at GMAT, but by no means not I don't think a very, very important one.
Right. Your career before MBA was also into logistics and operations, and after an MBA also you focused on that. How different is it for you now compared to what it was before? And what are the kind of roles that people can get into when they are looking at supply chain?
Absolutely. I think when I initially got into it, like I said, I didn't really know much about it myself. And I don't think there was much, there's certain, it's a very sort of not quite as explored in the background element of it. For those of you who've been following the news in recent kind of evergreen issue, trapping in the Suez Canal, and suddenly everything's not, your supermarkets don't have what is needed. It is a big, complex sort of gray area, which hasn't been that well explored, which is where the opportunity is. I think pre-MBA, I had a fairly narrow view in terms of how that fits into a sort of manufacturing profile, maybe, in terms of inventory, in terms of, just the day-to-day operational elements of it. I think the post-MBA, a few of the elements that really helped me out is some of those other core elements that we talked about earlier. So when you talk about finance and marketing and just in terms of the overall view of a business, and this could be anything, in any field that you're looking at, there's always supply and demand, right? And the kind of fundamentals of that supply and demand, irrespective of what sort of company you go into, whether that's tech or you're a tech product that you're building out, or if it's a fintech product that you're building, essentially remains the same. And having this sort of overarching good foundational understanding will help you see the elements in terms of what needs to be done in that particular field. Specific to logistics and supply chain, I think when I moved into Amazon, Amazon is a big global company. I think it's a lot more fast moving, and there's a lot of focus on having a general skill set that allows you to move within Amazon or anywhere else in that chain. And within that operation space, and Amazon doing pretty well, it really set me up for success in understanding how the senior leadership within Amazon thinks and how they sort of view ahead to make sure you're at the top of the curve in terms of logistics and supply chain. So whether that's focusing on how automation, having visibility. So if you talk about global supply chain, shipping container times from how much you can fit into a container between China to some other location, and how that's going to have an impact on what product you have, and how do you delight your customers with it. These are like big, complex questions that I don't think we still have very great answers to. So that visibility was something that I really, really cherish. And on a more day-to-day basis, for my, as a leader, how can I be a better leader? How can I better understand it so I can help grow my team? The MBA was absolutely invaluable in it.
Right. How has your perspective changed when you look at a problem now versus maybe before MBA?
I think the first piece I would kind of say is it has expanded that perspective. When you're coming out of engineering, especially education in India prepares you for a lot of elements of in what we call Amazon diving deep in engineering, and looking at it from a very, very analytical perspective, which has a lot of value, and in a lot of cases, which is what is needed. But the breadth of the other elements that focus in on it. So when you talk about marketing, it has you have a picture of Mad Men, but it's not quite that. It ties in terms of how if you have a project that you need to convince your stakeholders of, you need to have some of those skill sets. You need to be able to say, hey, I've done the analysis. This is incredible, but if you can't communicate that to your stakeholders, you're not going to be able to bring that value forward. So that expansion of perspective on what makes someone being good at logistics and supply chain, but a great leader in logistics and supply chain, change fundamentally, especially with Ross and the hands-on learning and the different projects I've had my cohort from, we had 20 different countries with different backgrounds, and the skill sets that each of them bring in. So again, looking at operations and supply chain, visibility, regimen, routine is very, very critical. And I personally, I felt I was very great at like diving deep in analysis, but I was not very regimented, as I mentioned in my MBA prep, if you will. And I had, one of my very close friends who I did my internship at Tesla with, was a Navy commander or something. And while I don't, he would be the first to admit, like, technical skills are not the greatest. His regimen, discipline, and getting to approaching problems, breaking it down into kind of the constituent parts, how to and then tackle it, managing time expectations, pushing back. One of the Amazon leadership principles is, disagree and commit, having backbone. Like even if it's someone very, very senior up coming and saying, you need to do this, to go back saying, no, this is not going to be done. You can't do it in 1 week, 2 weeks. It was very, very helpful in expanding that perspective.
Right. So what are the typical problems that you solve, on your day-to-day life today?
So my role currently, and I've moved in a few different spaces within Amazon. So broadly, I guess in Amazon logistics, it's a big complex element. And it's part of why what I love about supply chain is we've only touched the surface. Even for a company as big as Amazon, there is just so much opportunity in the different elements that we still need to optimize and improve on and get visibility on. So right now I'm working with what we call our middle mile source of transportation. So within the supply chain space, connecting the dots between getting products between different parts of Europe. So I'm based in London, taking care of projects within Europe to make sure that in the global sense, how do we make sure that a product that you see on Amazon here, actually can get to you? And that requires a lot of different moving bits and pieces, a lot of analysis, a lot of understanding of the international business. Like right now, one of the big issues that we're dealing with, Brexit, has thrown a bit of a wrench in terms of how quickly we can have a particular product available, because previously the network was very optimized in making sure if you see it, even if it's based in France and you need it in the UK, you could get it in a day. But with Brexit, that's an additional complication that you've not now had to factor in, that delays some of these times. So a lot of my time now, especially as a sort of as a senior manager, is one, understanding what the problems that we need to solve are, what the KPIs that we're trying to move, what are the key elements impacting it, and then right now, because I lead a team, right now it's a bit of a shorter team, smaller team rather. Understanding that problem, setting that out for my team, helping them, putting them on the path to success for it, and then checking in to see that that is the way we need to go. My projects right now, especially with what's happening in the world, it's changed a little bit. I'm focusing a lot on sustainability, so greener transportation. I'm sure as you've heard, COP26 recently happened in Glasgow, and Amazon has very, very ambitious visions on being net carbon neutral by 2025, 2030. So it's a very exciting space that combines supply chain and logistics, but also with going greener for the planet and environment.
Interesting. What is the advice you would give to young aspirants who are looking for a career in supply chain? If they are maybe already working in operations right now, or if they are looking at a career in supply chain, how should they actually carve their journey, or how should they actually think through what they should do? Any advice?
I think learning as much as you can. I feel like while there's still quite a bit in terms of this whole supply chain space, that there's still a lot of gray areas, a lot of white space that we still have opportunities on. Like there's a lot more information available, especially in recent times, in terms of how sort of the global supply chain works and what are the elements that goes into it, and what are the big problems being faced by small and big companies and governments that drive it. If I look at UK now, problems in supply chain are having a very substantial impact on people in Christmas and product availability. The favorite types of toffees are not in the supermarkets anymore. But start learning more about how these pieces fit in. Like supply chain logistics is a big sort of field. Like what are the elements that go into it, and within that, what resonates with you, and how can you build that sort of skill set? And I see a couple of questions that have been popping up. I think like, what are the elements that you can take from what you're working on already? So data analysis, statistics, and being able to visualize and convert some of these data into to understanding it, providing visibility to folks around what the gaps are, what the challenges are, making sense of it. It's a great skill set to have. In the same way, to understand, if you have a technical background, if you have coding background, maybe some of these are elements that you can build solutions for yourself. I know I have friends who launch startups in India that are doing very, very successfully addressing those exact gaps. So understanding what the problems are, looking at what your skill set is that can tie in well to solve those problems, and within the broader sort of global supply chain and logistics spaces, what are the sort of problems that you want to solve, and how you can tie that in will definitely put you in really good stead.
Right.
The one final piece, I know I don't want to go on, is that it isn't a field that requires too much of job specific knowledge. Like you don't need to be able to write code in Python or C, right? If you have it, you can apply it, but you can learn whatever you need to learn to do well.
Right. Awesome. Cool. So thank you so much, Mukund. I think, this was amazing and extremely interesting, and we got to learn a lot of things. What I will do now is let me take a few questions, because I think there are a few questions which are something that I'm definitely sure you would be able to address. So there's a question by someone who says that I have a 670 on my GMAT and my goal is to get into a supply chain industry. I have 9 years of work experience and I'm from a merchant navy background. I want to get into Ross. Do you think it is a realistic choice for me?
I definitely think so. Again, just being very, I think you mentioned 670, is that right?
Yeah.
I would, just because, the way colleges look at it, might try and get that number up a little bit. But just speaking from in terms of your background, like, being part of the merchant navy, 9 years of work experience is a great, sort of entry point into logistics supply chain, right? I have friends, like I said, who've been in, Navy, merchant navy, and a lot of what you do in terms of process, in terms of regimen, and that translates very, very well into setting up a good foundation for a post, I guess, MBA career into supply chain logistics. You have, as part of the merchant navy, you've been part of that global supply chain already, if you will. So having that subject knowledge will definitely fit in. Applying to Ross, I would, again, going back to that earlier advice, speak to that, the experiences that you've had that ties in well both into what Ross looks for in terms of experiential learning, and also how you envision, just a little bit of what I've covered now, but I'm sure you can learn a lot more about what Ross offers, how that's going to tie in very well with what your prior experiences and what you plan to do after, especially in operations and supply chain. So I think that forms a great storyline to speak to. And yeah, I definitely think it's a great school to go to. But I would, I guess, from my prior experience, just because we have a lot of applicants from India, like, try and work on the GMAT score a little bit more.
Right. I agree. There's one more question here. When you're looking at hiring for people in supply chain roles, what kind of technical skills are you looking at, or is there a personality that you're looking at, especially when it comes to these kind of roles?
Absolutely. I've done a fair bit of hiring at Amazon, and the great thing about supply chain and I guess operations as a whole is you don't need to have a great amount of specific skill set, as I said. Being able to work with data, because that is where the world is going to now, is always helpful. So having a background that does have some sort of, I guess, examples of that, ability to use data to use that data to drive actions would definitely be beneficial. You don't, like I said, need to know any specific technologies. Like I said, that's the thing about supply chain right now. There's no one unified software that everyone uses to track supply chain, right? Most people still work off of Excel, but understanding that or providing, I guess, the evidence that you can learn quickly, use that data, use that to get to understand what the problems are, and then being able to take action on it. Like, oftentimes, the solution might be, not very technically complicated, but identifying, maybe it's just a dashboard that gives you visibility into a particular lead time, for example, right? That's a sort of great example that will tie in very well to showcase that, yes, you get what supply chain is. Yeah. So not a specific skill set, but more along how you approach problems as an individual, I suppose.
Right. Mukund, there's one more question that says, what are your thoughts on operations consulting? Is that something, because that also is aligned to somewhere in supply chain, right? Because that's also solving a problem in supply chain. So what are your thoughts on those kind of roles? And, how is there anything different that they have to focus on when they're looking at operation consulting roles?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Operations consulting is a very growing element of, I think, a lot of consulting firms. I know for a fact McKinsey has a dedicated ops consulting or operations practice, if you will, focusing on it. It's a very interesting career space. I think the key difference in skill set is, whereas in pure operations, when you're talking about whether you're running supply chain for a plant or logistics for a plant, you're focusing more on leadership and implementation a little bit more. So having, you come up with a plan to improve a particular process, but you also need to be able to work with your stakeholders, convince them to deploy it, and make sure you go back, correct it. With operational consulting, you need to have not necessarily have done it. You need to be able to come up with this plan while taking into account what the realities of a particular situation for that particular project or client might be. But also you need to be able to market a little bit more. You need to have more of a understanding of the kind of adjacent core competencies. So in terms of finance, the market impact, like if you suggest something to a client, you need to know what the broader impact of that is going to be in that. And so the wider variety of industries that you've had exposure to, and you will have exposure to. And I think a lot of consulting companies, they do set you up for success by that. You might work for, you might solve operations for an airport at one day, then it might be a car manufacturing plant another day. And you'll find similarities and differences. But no, it's a great path for those who want to try it.
Right. One other interesting question, since I think you've seen both worlds, right? You've seen supply chain in India as well as, now you're looking at the Europe geography. Is there a difference when it comes to, because when we are looking at different kind of problems, there is a cultural influence that comes in, in different domains, right? Does supply chain affect, or is it like completely region agnostic or cultural agnostic?
Ooh, good question. I don't know how good an answer I can give. I'll take a crack at it, because like I said, when I was in India at the time, I was still fairly new to this field myself. So I had a slightly narrower vision, if you will. I think it is more region agnostic than other fields. It's you are trying to solve a pure supply and demand, a problem, if you will, right? And more often than not, the way the world works now, it's a broad, global, interconnected supply chain, and the channels tend to be, if you're ordering something, chances are it's coming somewhere from either China, Vietnam, India, or, there's products being shipped both ways across the world, and it's a very evolving landscape. So at a high level, I would say it's fairly region agnostic. I have seen difference in how we approach it. There's a lot more, I think from my time, and I'll maybe give an example between US and UK as an example. When we talk about how we approach it, the US has a lot more space. So it's easier to say, build up larger inventory as compared to if you would in Europe, where you have no space at all. And India was somewhere in between, I would say, in terms of it. You do have space, but you also are kind of constrained in some of the other areas. So I would say not as location region specific. A lot of the underlying problems tend to be the same.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much, Mukund. I think I had a lot of insights through this discussion that I had with you, and I'm sure the people who have attending and listening to us on YouTube also have got a very good idea about supply chain and what are the kind of focus they need to have. Thank you so much, Mukund. Before I just wrap up, I have a few things that I want to tell the
Absolutely.
people who are watching us. So we have another webinar on 26th of November, which is focusing on the GMAT verbal aspect. This is in collaboration with GMAT Club. So if you are looking at taking your GMAT anytime soon and applying for round 2, please make sure you attend this webinar. A few things around how Crackverbal helps. So Mukund is part of our application consulting mentor panel too. So we also help students apply to top schools abroad, where we go through the entire process of helping them right from brainstorming to helping them draft their essays and reviewing them and making sure that they are application or submit ready when it comes to applying to top schools. Some things on how we go about the whole thing. We help, we connect you to, based on your profile and based on your background, we connect you to the right mentor, and then we go through each and every aspect of your application, which is important for you to submit a very strong and a bulletproof application, right? So that's how we go through the entire process. We have our mentors who are from all schools. I couldn't put all of them here, but we have close to 40 mentors who are from most top schools across the world. If you're looking at help with GMAT, please reach out to us. Here are the information where you can reach out to us. You can mail us, WhatsApp us, or even connect with us on social media so that we can definitely help you out. All right. Thank you so much, Mukund. This was amazing. I had a wonderful discussion and enjoyed talking to you. I think we really got great insights about this entire industry and what actually takes to get into a school like Ross, and also your journey after that. So thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to having more webinars with you like this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you had all the information that you wanted, and looking forward to having you for the next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice weekend, Mukund. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice weekend for all of you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.